Welcome to the second episode of What is My Country, the YouTube show where we talk to people from national independence movements in Europe, discussing the movements themselves and the politicians' relationship to them. I'm delighted to be joined by Lorna Slater, who is the co-leader of the Scottish Green Party. Hi Lorna, how are you?
Good morning, I'm very well, thank you.
Okay, so I just wanted to start, so what was it that made you want to get involved with the Scottish Greens? What was it that made you want to be a member and join the party, as it were?
So I'm what we call a surger. I hadn't been involved in politics in any way at all. And then we had the Scottish independence referendum in 2014. And I had always been a Green voter, but that was kind of the extent of what my involvement was. And suddenly during the independence campaigning, Green yes was everywhere. The Scottish Greens were everywhere. They were huge. They were clearly a powerful force with a clear vision. And it was suddenly like, oh, wait, these are people who could really make a difference. And then when we lost the referendum, there was a sense, I think, amongst a lot of us of an opportunity missed. So independence was something that I had come to believe in. I voted for it. And then when it didn't happen, it was like, oh, that's a shame. And about 2 weeks after the referendum, I joined the Scottish Greens. And in that exact same time period, so did thousands of other people. And I think tens of thousands went and joined the SNP. So it was really interesting that a defeat of that independence, the vote on that day, led to so many of us going, do you know what, we're not done with this. We want to do more. So that is really interesting. And then I went along to my first Green Party meeting, and they were asking for people to help organize get organized for the next Westminster general election. And I went along to a meeting, and I kind of hadn't stopped since. And within 6 months, I had managed a general election campaign and stood to be a candidate in Holyrood elections last time around. I was third on the list last time as well. So yeah, it all just kind of snowballed from there.
So what was it about the arguments for independence that made you support? So what was it that made you support the independence movement? I just think it's interesting to see, because obviously it's seen as a nationalist movement, but obviously the Green Party and Green parties traditionally are anti-nationalist, if you get what I mean. So what was it about independence which made you think, yeah, I can get behind this?
So back in the day, there were three main issues for me. Because for me, independence is about achieving something. It isn't. I'm not Scottish. I have no Scottish ancestry. That's not part of my identity at all. I live in Scotland. I'm just an ordinary taxpayer here. But for me, there were three reasons to leave the UK, and one was nuclear weapons. I'm absolutely against nuclear weapons. I think they're an abomination. Two is the first past the post voting system. I think it's undemocratic. I think it leads to a very bad version of politics where you have the red team and the blue team screaming across the aisle at each other, and every new incoming government just tries to undo the past of what the last government does. It doesn't lead to long-term thinking. It doesn't lead to the politics of negotiation and consensus. It blocks in a significant way participation of underrepresented groups, meaning that you get these sort of old Etonians running the show who are totally out of touch. I just feel that that's a really broken system. And I also feel that there's no route for the UK out of that system. Neither of the big two parties back proportional representation because it's not in their interest. They are after power only. They're not after any sort of, they don't have any sort of values behind that power other than achieving it. And the third reason is the unelected House of Lords. That is wrong. Hereditary power is wrong. Having a certain people representatives from one religion in there is wrong. Everything about that's wrong. So at the time, there were three reasons for me to feel that an independent Scotland could do better. And of course, we have since added a fourth, which is Brexit. I believe that the European Union, although it has many flaws, is still the most significant project that any group of countries has ever worked on together. 27 countries coming together to share a common belief in human rights, in democracy, in building a common peaceful future is unheard of. Now, there's lots of problems with the EU, and I could pick it apart as well, but fundamentally, no one has ever done that before. It's an exciting project, and for all its faults, it's better than anything that's gone before. So not being part of that is such a shame. So yeah, those are my four strong reasons for feeling Scottish independence is the way forward.
That's interesting. So you mentioned the Brexit referendum. How disappointed were you by the overall Remain campaign I'm sure. I mean, I'm sure it was very different in Scotland, but almost, in my opinion, I felt the UK government, especially, almost defended it in a very negative sense. It was very much, oh, if we vote to leave, it will be disastrous and horrible. It wasn't a positive campaign for the European Union.
Correct. Almost nobody was making the case for a positive case for staying in the EU. We did, the Scottish Greens ran a campaign for that, and we feel that we succeeded where we were able to run that campaign. We did have a positive, we did have a positive vote for Remain. In fact, all of Scotland voted to remain. So the people of Scotland understand the benefit of being part of a structure from the European Union. Myself, the R&D projects I work on in tidal energy are significantly funded by the European Union. The whole point of those projects is to create pan-European supply chains so that we can work together to develop new technology and build up our sustainable industries. It's absolute insanity to take ourselves away from that.
Okay, so do you know if we just talk about sort of the green vision of independence? So I'm trying to sort of work out how are the Greens different from the SNP's sort of standard vision of independence. So how would you say you differ from the SNP in your sort of, how would you, in your vision of independence, how is it different from the SNP's?
It's significantly different than the SNP's. So the SNP's vision of independence is very cautious in the sense that it is, we're going to keep everything exactly the same. We're going to keep the pound. We're going to keep a neoliberal economic system. We're going to keep the Queen. We're going to keep everything exactly as it is. We, the Scottish Greens, we don't think that things are working as they are. We think the current economic system not only leaves loads of people behind, leaves people requiring food banks in precarious work, it's actually destroying the planet that we live on. So far from that being a cautious or sensible thing to do, we think that that's pretty near suicidal. Continuing to operate the economy the way it has been run is morally wrong because it leaves so many people suffering, and dangerous because it means that we are destroying our own life support system on this planet. If we reach, past 4 degrees of global warming, we are starting to see sort of massive die-offs of the kind of things that the humans need to survive. At 6 degrees of warming, as far as we know, 95% of life on Earth will be extinct. These are very dramatic things. So we feel that significant change is needed. A big part of that is restructuring how our economy works. Instead of letting big corporations decide how we use our resources, that we should make more plastic widgets that nobody needs, we need to get together as a community and decide how our resources are best used. So some examples of that are things like a jobs guarantee. That's a system by which anyone who wants work can have work, and communities decide what work needs doing. Do we have people that need caring for? Do we have infrastructure that needs building? Do we have people that need training, perhaps in new skills? And you decide as a community, well, these are the things that we want to do. And you invest in those parts of your economy and you build up those parts of your economy. Things like a universal basic income that would leave nobody in destitution in that kind of terribly damaging and ironically expensive type of poverty. Poverty is hugely expensive and damaging to an economy. Children who grow up in dire poverty don't reach their potential in terms of what they can contribute to the economy, and neither do they, sort of grow up with the positive mental and physical health that you would expect people to. And so for their whole lives, they require additional help because they're suffering from the mental and physical ravages of being raised in terrible poverty. And we can eliminate these things if we change how our economy works. Things like shutting down oil and gas. So we, of course, feel that there should be a date. There should be pick a date in the calendar. Sometimes it could be in 2 years or 5 years, or on some levels, the important thing is to pick a date and then work backwards. On this day, we will no longer extract oil and gas from the North Sea. So we know how many jobs we have to retrain and transition to renewable energy. We know how many assets we have to repurpose. We know how many oil rigs we need to decommission. We could do that. We could create a plan. So the SNP is basically saying they'll extract oil and gas. They will do maximum extraction. That's maximum destroying of the planet. It can't be done. It's much too dangerous and it's unnecessary. We have 25% of all the renewable resources in Europe. We have 1% of the population of Europe. Let's be clear. We have vast amounts of renewable resources. So a big part of what we need to do is come up with a national plan for how we're going to develop those resources. But this is going to require huge public investment. So that is the major change to how we imagine the economy. I think we're done with this kind of laissez-faire, dog-eat-dog market economy, which leaves so many people homeless and is destroying the planet. Instead, we want an economy that is built on well-being, on well-paid jobs, on strong communities. And that's going to require strong public investment. Now, I think that's actually, given the COVID crisis, a lot less controversial than it would have been maybe before, because it's clear from the damage to the economy that the COVID crisis has created that there is going to require massive public investment anyway. Even the Tories are lobbing money about. The question is where that money goes. And we all know that after the 2008 banking crisis, that money went into banks and corporations. And as a result, we saw asset price inflation. The stock market went crazy. House prices went crazy. But actually, the normal wages for ordinary people didn't improve. Working conditions didn't improve. Work became more precarious. Cuts to the social safety net were implemented in an attempt to pay for the bailout of the banks and so on. So it isn't a question of how much money is needed, it's where it's going to go. And we feel that that money needs to go directly to the people, directly to people who need it, not just to big corporations. Money trickles up. If you give it in at the top, it doesn't trickle down very well, but it trickles up beautifully. So we need to turn our economy over and put people and planet at the center of it.
Okay, so just you mentioned the currency and the head of state at the start of your answer. I just want to clarify. So the Greens are a Republican party, right? You support a.
I don't think it's actually written in our party policy anywhere officially, but many Green Party members are indeed Republicans. I'm sure many are not. It's not official, but yes, I myself don't see any point in a hereditary monarch. I think that hereditary power is part of the problem that we have here. Inherited wealth is inefficient. It keeps it out of the economy. It gives some people the idea that they're better than other people. I think it's a terrible way to represent your country. So yeah, not in favor.
And in terms of currency, do the Greens have a policy on currency?
Yeah. So our policy is for an independent Scottish currency, and that is because we feel that sticking with the sterling is a dangerous thing to do. It means that we are very limited in the kind of economic levers that we would have to build a new country. If you're building a new country, you need your own currency so that you can have control of all monetary and economic policy. We will definitely need that. I mean, the thing is, building a new country has been done. Lots of countries have become independent from the British Empire before. There's a pathway for this, and countries like Australia and Canada have their own currency. It's something that could be done. You can absolutely do it. It's more that we better understand now the risks of a small country not having full control of its monetary policy. And the example of that was Greece and the European Union, how they were forced to implement terrible austerity because they didn't have control of their currency. And I don't see why we would do that in Scotland. It's a crazy thing to do. So yeah, definitely. An independent Scottish currency.
I was going to ask, does that also apply to the euro? But I think you just answered that question.
Well, so my understanding is that we couldn't take up the euro right away anyway, that you have to have an independent currency first. So that is the route. Now, I suspect that an independent Scotland would do what Sweden has done and say, you know, we will join the euro when the time is right, without any sort of specific commitment to that. And that's fine. So that's what Sweden's done. I'm not sure if any other country's done that, but yeah, you can just say, yeah, we'll join the euro when the time is right. And we can just push that out into the future once we've got our own economy going. But I mean, of course, we have to rejoin the European Union first. There's a whole bunch more steps there if we did want to join the euro later.
Okay, so skipping forward to August 2019, you became co-leader of the Green Party. Mm-hmm. What was it that made you want to become leader? What was it that sort of inspired you to stand and try and become co-leader?
Well, it's more a matter of the principle of not asking other people to do something you wouldn't do yourself. So a big part of what we're trying to do is get better representation in politics for underrepresented groups. Women, Black people and other ethnic minorities, disabled people, rainbow Greens. We need more diversity in our politics. And it's something that behind the scenes, I've done a lot of work with the Scottish Greens on. And I feel like I can't try and push other women to do politics if I'm going, oh yeah, but I'm not going to stand. So my philosophy for effective democracy, and this applies within the Scottish Greens as well as without in the world, is that we should all stand. We should all stand for everything all the time. And I don't think that means, because I don't like the idea that you sort of go, oh, well, I won't stand against so-and-so, or I shouldn't stand. The idea that you're standing against someone, I don't like that at all. You're standing with someone for a position. And in an effective democracy, you give the voters as much choice as you can. So actually, the question is, why isn't everyone else standing? Everyone should stand for everything because voters need the most choice. There's too much power on incumbents. How can you challenge power? How can you be held accountable? How can you hold others accountable if there's no choice, if there's limited choices? So it's more a result of that sort of philosophy that I felt like I needed to give voters that choice. We had a really good election that year. We had 6 candidates, I believe, for the co-leader's position. So I'm really pleased about that, that there were more people excited about standing for that post. That's starting to get our internal democracy much healthier. And I've said I'm hoping 5 women stand with me for the post next year when it comes up for election again. And I really hope that's the case. I want to give the Green Party excellent choices as to who could be their next co-leaders as well.
So it's interesting. I think it's yourselves and the English and Welsh Greens are the only major parties in the UK that run the sort of co-leader system, if that makes sense. What is it about that way of running things that you think works better than just a traditional one leader, as it were?
So it's an interesting thing, and I don't know if better is the right way to describe it. It's almost an experiment. So something that we do within the Greens is we try to live our values, and that includes how we organize ourselves as a party. So we often do what we consider to be experiments in democracy to try and just see how it works. And the co-ness is actually one of those things. So we actually have that at every single level of the party. Every single branch has co-conveners. Every single national committee has co-conveners. We have co-conveners of the National Council, co-chairs of the executive, and co-leaders. And part of the reason we do that, there's kind of 2 key reasons. One is to always reserve a space for a woman. So we all know that politics, women are drastically underrepresented. We make up more than 50% of the population, but we're some 35% of MSPs, something like that. So we're really underrepresented. By reserving a space in all those leadership positions for a woman, it means that we have to have at least 50% representation of women on all those levels. So that's a big part of it, to make sure that our spokespeople, at least one of them is a woman. It would be possible for both to be a woman, or one to be a woman and one to be a non-binary person, or one to be a woman and one to be a man, but one must be a woman. And the other part of it is that a big part of the Green philosophy is to work toward consensus and to negotiate, to hear the other person's point of view. And we feel that the co-leadership embodies that. It's never a dictatorial thing. It's never one person saying, this is how it will be. There is always a process of, well, here's my thoughts. What are your thoughts? How do we work together on this? And it helps us build our skills of negotiation and consensus building, which are so important to all of us. For example, in many of our Green Party institutions, how we run our committees and our National Council, we often don't vote on things. And the reason we don't vote is because we don't need to, because through the course of discussion, we come to consensus. And if there is a consensus in the room, there's no need to vote. So it's actually really interesting and a very important part of what we do. So as I say, it's about us kind of living our values and experimenting with radical democracy.
It's interesting. So you're nearly 15 months into the role now as co-leader. What would you say? I mean, first of all, have you enjoyed it? Has it been a good experience? And secondly, what would you say have been the most positive things you've brought to the role, and what have been your sort of big achievements so far, would you say?
Well, unfortunately, I think the coronavirus has blocked a lot of the achievements that I was very much hoping for. So one of the big things that I felt it was important to do was, as a co-leader, to get around to visit as many branches as possible. Yeah. And doing that in the early part of the year, because I think, or before coronavirus got us, because I think it's so important for the Green Party members to feel sort of part of a national organization. I understand that, like a lot of things in Scotland, if you're outside the central belt, it can feel like you're being left out, like your views aren't being heard. And I really wanted to kind of do something proactive to help people feel connected. And that was physically going around to branches and giving talks, meeting members, which I loved doing. But unfortunately, of course, coronavirus has stopped. Obviously I do some stuff online, which is fine. And before coronavirus, we were also getting fairly regular television spots. So that's relatively new as well. Now I think now that we have 6 MSPs, we're being recognized as one of the major parties, and we get a little bit more television spots. So I had never done any sort of media like that before. The first time I went on television, I can't tell you how terrified I was. I was absolutely, I was in a real state. I was just trying not to throw up in front of everybody, but it was, so learning, getting more comfortable on a camera, getting more comfortable as a public spokesperson has been a big learning curve for me, because that's totally outside my experience. So yeah, I guess those are the things. I mean, I hope I'm bringing something to the role in terms of trying to maximize visibility, but also trying to help the visibility of other, particularly women within the party. So I've started doing a podcast. I try and get one out every couple of weeks. And on those, my guests are people, experts, candidates in the party. And of course, I'm trying to make sure at least half of, I think it's more than half of those are women, so that people get their own chance for visibility. So I'm trying to use my platform to help our candidates, particularly our women's, get that visibility and get that experience of public speaking and so on. So I'm hoping that's what I'm achieving. Okay.
So you have mentioned COVID a couple of times. This interestingly, this year, polls for independence at a similar time to the COVID crisis have started to go towards independence much more. We saw the Ipsos Mori poll, which I think was 58% in favour of independence. I think that was the 8th consecutive national poll in Scotland, which had shown in favour of independence. Do you think that is because of COVID, or do you think maybe it's something else that this year we have suddenly seen the polls going so much more towards independence?
Well, I think it's the UK's disastrous response to it. I think it's really clear now how disastrous privatization of things that ought to be public services are, when you get Serco and so on to run systems that should be public services, and they take billions of euro pounds and then actually deliver something that doesn't work at all. We can absolutely see that the whole philosophy that the UK government has been run on, the sort of give money to your best pals and hope for the best, is wrong. And the fact that our NHS in Scotland is still fully public, I think has given people confidence. In some ways, I think it isn't necessarily anything that we've done in Scotland. It's more watching the UK government, Boris Johnson's Conservative government, fall apart. The cronyism, the corruption, the spectacular wastes of money, watching their Brexit plan, I use that term loosely, derail. They don't seem to have a handle on anything. They don't seem to stand for anything. They've got no ethical basis for what they do. They flounder from one thing to another. They just look incompetent and corrupt. And I think people are starting to come around to the idea that it's, the Scottish government, for all its faults, looks fairly competent and reliable. We have a properly nationalized NHS up here, and we're looking across to some of the other small European countries who seem to be doing, better in this crisis than the UK is, where the UK is offering us Brexit, chlorinated chicken, reduction to our environmental standards, and it's just like, the union just isn't offering us anything anymore. There's nothing there. They can't even make a good case for it. This is the sort of hilarious bit, that the unionists are like, you can't have a referendum. Well, if you can't come up with a good argument why we should stay in the union, you've already lost. And I think there is a sort of resignation that they've already lost. I can paint you a great picture of Scotland being just an ordinary, small, independent European country like Denmark or Ireland or any number of other countries. Pretty good compared to where the UK is headed.
I find it interesting that it seems this year has been in terms of the opinion polls, has been the sort of straw that broke the camel's back. I mean, we had obviously the Brexit referendum. The polls didn't really change that much. There was a few which showed a bit of improvement from the independent side, but not much. You had Theresa May's obviously government was a bit of a shambles, probably be the accurate statement. And again, the polls didn't really seem to shift. Boris Johnson, of course, then became prime minister, and the polls didn't shift. So I just find it interesting. This year has been sort of the thing which has finally seems to have made Scottish people go, no, that's enough. We've had enough of this. We want to leave.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of COVID and the Brexit. So I think a lot of us were in denial about Brexit. We thought there would be a way out. We thought that maybe we could get a second referendum. We thought that maybe they would negotiate a comprehensive trade deal. We kept sort of convincing ourselves that it wasn't going to be that bad. It's going to be that bad. In fact, it's going to be worse. And I'm a little bit myself alarmed that we aren't talking enough about that. Like it's not much more than 2 months until our food and medicine is going to be trapped in trucks sitting at the border. I think we should maybe have a plan around that. Like that seems like a really dangerous thing in the middle of an epidemic to also have food and medicine shortages. So yeah, I'm actually worried that the Brexit train wreck hasn't hit us yet, and that we're in for a sort of epic winter, but in the worst possible way, where we have a coronavirus peak and a flu season peak right when the effects of Brexit start to happen. So yeah, it's pretty frightening actually.
So looking ahead to May, the Scottish Parliament elections, I'm just wondering what will be the big issues that the Greens campaign for? What will be the sort of, I mean, maybe obviously independence is kind of a given, and also I'm guessing climate change as well will be a big one. But sort of what sort of platform are the Greens looking to put forward in May?
So I'm just trying to remember, we actually did a survey to members. So as you probably know, everything in the Scottish Greens is done at a grassroots level. So there was literally a survey that went out to every member about a month ago that said, what would you like to see our top 3 things in the campaign be? But now I can't actually remember what one. I think it was climate crisis, Scottish independence, and restructuring our economy. So things around dealing with homelessness, dealing with food poverty, that sort of thing. So I think it'll be those 3 things. So I guess we would call that a just transition away from oil and gas to something more sustainable. We would call that Scottish independence, Green Yes campaign, and we would call that working toward a fairer society. So making sure that, a fair day's work for a fair day's pay, everyone can afford to feed their kids, that kind of thing. So those, I would say, would probably be our key 3 platforms.
So will you be standing on both the regional lists and the sort of first past the post part? Will you be standing on both papers?
Yeah, so we will. We'll probably stand on. So again, with the Scottish Greens, these things are not decided at a national level; they're decided at a local level. So each branch will decide which candidates they are going to put up. So that's not something. So the Scottish Greens, we're not a top-down organization. Patrick and I don't tell everyone what to do. We in fact work for the party. We're just the spokespeople. So each branch and region will decide for themselves what they want to do. What we expect they will probably do is that each region will put forward 1 or 2 constituencies. So we're starting to dip our toe in the water. We're a major party in Scottish politics. We need to start dipping our toe into the water. We need to start winning constituencies, and there are a few that look potentially winnable for us. Kelvin in Glasgow, Central and Edinburgh North and Leith in Edinburgh are both potentially winnable for us. Other ones are maybe not winnable, but by tipping our toe in the water, we start to get practice at that kind of campaigning, and because it's a slightly different type of campaigning than campaigning for this. But yes, we're standing on list everywhere, and we expect to win list and MSPs everywhere. We're expecting to win 2 in Lothian, 2 in Glasgow, and 1 everywhere else as a minimum, but maybe more. Our polling is very good, and we feel like we have some good momentum behind us.
How many seats would that be overall? I think I saw a prediction. I think the recent polling predicted the Greens were going to get 10. I think I saw.
Yeah, the latest I think I saw was 11. But yeah, exactly. So 11 would be 2 in Highlands and Islands as well. Probably, obviously that's based on previous voting, but. So it's very exciting for us to nearly double our MSPs. Would be fantastic. It will make such a big difference. So yeah, exciting times.
So who do you think? I mean, interestingly, who do you think you'll take votes off mostly? Do you think it'll be the Labour Party or even possibly the SNP as well, maybe? Or
I think maybe to some extent. I think there are some people that are a bit fed up with the SNPs not supporting not making actual practical plans for dealing with the climate crisis. They sort of set targets and then walk away from them. I think there are people, particularly from the LGBTQ+ community, that are frustrated with the SNP's postponing of the DRA reforms yet again, and lack of support for trans rights, which is something we're very strong on. But I think largely it will be Labour. So poor old Scottish Labour have really got themselves into a bit of a bind because they have betrayed Scotland's workers, and they voted when we had the Smith Commission after the last independence referendum for things like workers' rights to continue to be a non-devolved power. So those are still continue to be controlled from Westminster, which means that that's exactly what Boris can sell to the Americans. You know, he can compromise workers' rights in Scotland to get his US trade deal. So Labour have really betrayed the workers of Scotland. They don't seem to stand for anything anymore. They sort of abstain on all the key votes. Keir Starmer is definitely a sort of more neoliberal in the style of Tony Blair. They see, because they are unionists, that means they're in favor of Brexit now. They are nowhere talking about having another Brexit referendum. They're nowhere talking about rejoining the EU. So all they stand for is the union and Brexit now. And I just don't think that's a winner in Scotland. Many of the Labour policies in terms of supporting workers' rights have been Green policies all along. The 10-hour working, this 10-hour, £10 minimum wage was a Scottish Green Party policy long before it was a Labour Party policy. So I think that we can make really big inroads into Labour, and that many Labour people are particularly concerned, many Labour voters are particularly concerned about Labour's lack of planning for sustainable jobs. The STUC this week issued a manifesto which the Greens supported, and that was about absolutely needing a plan to transition jobs out of unsustainable industries into sustainable industries. People need to know that they're going to have work for the next 20, 30, 50 years if they're going to feel secure. And leaving jobs in oil and gas and leaving it up to the market to decide what happens to those is akin to abandoning the miners in the 70s. It's horrific. It will lead to terrible suffering. And Labour seems to have walked away from all of that. So yeah, absolutely. I think I think Labour are in trouble, and I think we're well positioned to give those voters what they want.
Do you think you could beat them on some of the regional lists, or do you think that's a bit maybe too optimistic?
We are aiming to beat them.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
That is incredible, actually, just because obviously you would have probably said about 15 years ago, Labour was almost this impossible to move giant in Scottish politics. It's almost their sort of collapse even behind the Scottish Conservatives, who were obviously 15 years ago seen as a non-entity in Scottish politics. It is almost a sort of remarkable shift in how that's happened and how the Labour Party seems to just.
Yeah, so I think that's about Scottish devolution, and I think having the Scottish Parliament has allowed UK politics and Scottish politics to diverge, and both the Conservatives and the Labour Party are really operating at the level of UK politics. So they end up feeling out of touch with Scottish politics because Scottish politics has moved on. We're way different than UK politics. So now that in some ways works for the Tories because they get the voters who want the UK. They want Queen and country and bulldogs and crumpets and, you know, those sorts of, that's key values for them. But Labour voters aren't like that. And I think the Scottish Labour they're between a rock and a hard place. And they don't think they've served voters well. Okay.
So looking ahead to what happens after the election, assuming, I mean, the polls are looking very good in terms of a pro-independence majority, whether that be an SNP majority or a mix of SNP and Green. What happens? I'm assuming after that, then there would be a immediate move to try and have a second independence referendum. What would happen if Boris Johnson said no? Because in terms of the constitutional position, in theory, he could put his foot down and simply just say, no, I don't want there to be a second independence referendum. What do you think the move from the Scottish government should be in that scenario?
So I think that is what Boris Johnson will do. I mean, that's what he's been saying all along that he'll do. But his position becomes increasingly untenable. And even you see now, even conservative commentators are saying that this position on a referendum is counterproductive because even people who are in favor of the union are in favor of Scotland deciding its own future. So the more the Conservatives say, no, you can't have a referendum, the more people they're actually driving into the independence camp. So I think that they've realized that this is counterproductive. And I don't think they can stand against this. But I don't believe that there's a sort of magic number of MSPs that, you know, if you cross this magic number, suddenly Boris will go, oh, I've seen the lights. You may have a referendum. That's not what this is about. It isn't about a gimmick or a magic wand or magic number. if we want an independence referendum, what we have to do is get groundswell public support. That's the only thing that's going to get it for us. So this is approaching 60% of people are in favor of independence. That's fantastic. Let's drive that up. Let's make sure that that's a strong support of independence, not just a rejection of the UK, but people strongly in favor of a vision for a different kind of Scotland. And I think that that's where the Scottish Greens have a very unique role to play, because we have a clear vision of what independence is for. It isn't just independence for the sake. It is independence to achieve a whole bunch of really specific things around making ordinary people's lives better, around making Scotland fairer, around changing, radical land reform, how we change Scotland's land, how it's owned, how communities get a say in what happens around them. And that is the kind of vision that will bring people to independence. They just start looking more and more ridiculous. So that's what I'd like to focus on, is how we get that groundswell of support and how we keep it. Because the important thing really is that we win the referendum.
Yeah.
And I don't want to have what happened with Brexit, like winning by 52%. That's not good enough for me. Obviously, it would functionally work, but then you end up with a terribly divided, bitter country. And I don't want that. I want the people of Scotland to be engaged with and excited by the idea of building a new country. Now, I'm not going to say there's not going to be challenges there, but it's been done. People have built new countries before. We can work together and do this. We can make a brilliant future. And I think that's what's so exciting, is to kind of feel that power, that kind of, yeah, we can do this. And I'm really hoping we can harness that, because that is unstoppable.
Okay, so my final question, I do want to ask you about climate change. I mean, you have spoken about climate change to some extent, but I do want to ask you directly about climate change. So with all the big political issues we see with COVID, Brexit, independence, how important is it that you make sure that climate change doesn't get forgotten about and doesn't sort of, because I think the problem is that people talk about the importance of climate change, but there always seems to be another issue that's more important. There always seems to be another issue which we need to talk about first. So how, as the sort of Green Party, do you push against that? How do you say, look, all these other things are important, but so is climate change. Can we really need to start acting on climate change?
Yeah, I mean, you've nailed it right there. That's exactly it. So it's been really, really frustrating to us. I think it's been two years now since the IPCC report came out saying that we have to reduce carbon emissions by 7.5% every year for the next 10 years, or else we will exceed the Paris Agreement's target of 1.5 degrees of warming. So the Paris Agreement picked 1.5 degrees of warming, not because it's safe, but because 2 degrees is starting to be pretty terrifying. At 2 degrees, we have climate refugees all over the world. We're starting to get crop failures. We're starting to see the effects of people, food and water shortages. By 4 degrees, Glasgow's flooded, major cities are underwater, coral reefs are gone. We have worldwide food and water shortages. By the time we get to 4 degrees, we're in big trouble. But it's terrifying. So it's extremely frustrating to the Greens that exactly as you say, people going, oh yes, climate, yes, but first we're just going to expand these roads and build this new airport. It's like people don't get it. And I saw a good thing on Twitter the other week, which is, don't ask your politicians if they believe in climate change. Ask them if they understand it. Because unless people understand that we're looking at 3.5 degrees of warming in 50 years, and what 3.5 degrees means, it means that many houses are underwater. It means that many crops are failing. It means this many people are going to need to be rehomed. It means this many refugees are coming to us. People always say, well, how can we afford to deal with climate change? How can we afford not to? It's going to be very, very bad. So that's extremely frustrating to us, especially when we have governments that not only don't seem to get it, but are actively increasing our emissions by widening roads, by turning down applications for cycle routes, by doing things that are the exact antithesis of what we need to be doing. So people don't get it. They don't get it at all. And it's one of the reasons why we feel it's important to have Greens standing in every election, even in first past the post elections like the general election, because we are literally the only people who will say the words climate change on telly, on hustings. Other people just pretend like it's not happening, and they're increasingly looking out of touch. Something I credit very much to our young climate strikers. They know, they get it, and they have made concern about our future and our extinction, our potential extinction, mainstream. So good work to them. And it's up to the Greens to keep that in the conversation, to not let government off the hook, and to challenge every single one of their decisions on the basis of keeping us all alive. You'd think that wouldn't be controversial, but there we go.
Lorna Slater, thank you so much for talking to me. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Not at all. Lovely to speak with you.
Bye.
Hi guys, thank you for watching this latest episode of PhD-Politico discussions. If you enjoyed this video, then please don't forget to give it a like. And if you want to watch more content like this, then please do subscribe. Bye guys.